You're listening to Precinct 444, a podcast network from the National Law Enforcement Museum. Today we're bringing you an episode from the Encore series, where we revisit past museum programs and conversations. On this episode of Encore, we're reintroducing a two-part series about a program which originally aired on October 14th, 2020, titled Preventing Death by Suicide, a Chief-to-Chief Leadership Wellness Discussion. With National Police Week 2023 quickly approaching, Precinct 444 thought it would be appropriate to honor those fallen officers from years past who took their own lives. The discussion features chiefs of police and peer support specialists from across the country to combine their many resources and best practices into one program. Part 1 begins with opening comments from Marcia Ferranto, the CEO of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund, and introductions from each of the panelists. The discussion will touch on key building blocks and organization structures used to build a successful wellness program to help prevent death by suicides within the law enforcement profession. And now for part 1 of Preventing Death by Suicide, a Chief-to-Chief Leadership Wellness Discussion.
I am Marcia Ferranto, CEO of the National Law Enforcement Memorial and Museum. Today, we will hear from chiefs from across North America. They will share their experience in promoting officer wellness programs and also in responding to critical incidents, including officer-involved shootings, officer suicides, and other mental health events. The discussion will also include the impact of increasing morale and building acceptance for the concepts of police family environment for all employees, volunteers, and retired personnel by demonstrating care and accepting that it is okay not to be okay. Before we begin, I would like to thank our generous sponsor, LexisNexis Risk Solutions. LexisNexis is one of our newest program sponsors. They are the leading global provider of legal, regulatory, and business information and analytics that help customers increase productivity, improve decision-making and outcomes, and advance the rule of law around the world. This program is aligned with LexisNexis core values, and we are grateful that they are standing with us so that we are able to provide you, the viewer, the highest level of content and quality on the topic of Preventing Death by Suicide, a Chief-to-Chief Wellness Discussion. Our program's keynote address will be at the conclusion of our program due to the Honorable Abigail Spanberger's schedule. We are honored to have her with us today, so stay tuned for her remarks at the end of today's program. Now, it is my honor to introduce one of my favorite people, Chief Ed Rossler. Colonel Rossler has more than 32 years of law enforcement experience with Fairfax County Police Department in Virginia, where he has served as Chief of Police for the last 7 years. Colonel Rossler previously served as Deputy Chief of Patrol, managing crime-fighting efforts across all 8 district stations in a county of 400 square miles, serving over 1.2 million community members. One of Colonel Rossler's first actions as police chief was to form the Chiefs Council on Diversity Recruitment. The council engages community leaders to guide and advise the chief and the department's leadership team on how to achieve recruitment goals and better represent our culturally diverse communities within sworn civilian and volunteer workforce. So Colonel Rossler, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Marcia, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be joined by several hundred people, over 700 people on this conference. Our goal, as stated, is to talk chief to chief and share our best practices to prevent death by suicide. Our learning goals are one, to understand as the leader of an organization, you yourself need to be well. You need to be of sound mind, body, and soul in order to lead a wellness program in your agency and to have trust in that. So our secondary goal through sharing experiences is from a building block instructional fashion. So we'll talk about developing the organizational structure, understanding the needs of your agency, selecting the right person to lead your wellness program, to talk about partnerships and regional sharing, also confidentiality, internal affairs issues, outreach, especially to retirees, and developing additional wellness programs. Uh, then we'll go into a question and answer session. And as noted, we'll have our keynote speaker. So I'm going to first talk about how do you understand the pulse of your agency. And there's a survey tool that's available. And I'm going to ask Lieutenant Jay Carson to talk just briefly about a tool from the United States Marshal Service that will be available shortly. Jay?
As the chief said, he wanted me to talk about the assessment tool that we developed with our own staff clinicians within FCPD. We had experienced several suicides, I believe 6 suicides in a 5-year period, and the most recent one occurred in the back of a station parking lot in our McLean District Station. We knew we had to do something to be more proactive, so we decided to put together this assessment. It was 23 questions about trauma, about depression, anxiety, and about the repeated exposures to traumatic events. That survey ended up picking up traction, and where we ended up surveying 26 public safety agencies across the state of Virginia, and we had over 5,000 participants. And when we go back and we look at it, what we found was that out of all the agencies, 41% of them were suffering from depression, 71% of them suffering from anxiety, 18% felt the need for antidepressants, 43% were self-medicating with alcohol, 10% were using opioids to help cope with trauma and pain. We also had 27% of them were suffering from flashbacks and nightmares. Many of them, 67% of them, suffering from lack of sleep. 21% of them avoiding reminders of critical incidents. Obviously, hypervigilant. 67% of them were hypervigilant, and 43% of them felt like they had shut down and become withdrawn from their friends and family.
So, Jay, with all this information, can you just briefly, before we move on, talk about the next survey that we'll send to everyone from the United States Marshal Service?
Absolutely. So, as in the first survey, we partnered with U.S. Marshal Service after receiving these results from this first survey. We decided to do a 2.0 version. We met with U.S. Marshals. We have partnered with them as well as Southeastern University out of Florida. And we have created a survey I hope to be like no other. It has gone through the academic review and the IRB process, and we hope to have it out by the end of this month. I had a discussion with U.S. Marshals yesterday, and that is our plan. That survey was also a partnership with the VA, and we have embedded some tools in there to pick up PTSD, trauma, the effects of trauma. And it's a very diverse survey, which will tackle many different aspects of public safety. We hope that it'll be used as a national survey for all agencies to kind of get a snapshot of what their agency looks like compared to others, and how we can build programs in the future, and how we can go after legislative support for our first responders.
Thank you, Jay. And we'll pick up this conversation more. I wanted to get the survey tool out in front before we get started with our subject matter experts, because it will be important to use the survey tool to understand what the needs are of not only yourself, but your organization. So when we talk about personal wellness, I'm going to turn next to the Boulder Crest Foundation with Josh Goldberg and Dr. Bernie Gonzalez to talk about personal wellness. Bernie and Josh.
Thank you so much, Ed, and appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk about this meaningful and really important topic. And I would say, obviously, I know you well, and you are truly a leader on this issue, and I think there's no one better to be facilitating this. So let me start by talking a little bit about what the Boulder Crest Foundation is, and then a little bit about what we're up to in terms of the topic of suicide and first responders. So Boulder Crest Foundation is a 10-year-old nonprofit organization that is focused on first responders and combat veterans. And the nature of the work we do at our two facilities, we have a retreat facility in Virginia and one in Arizona, is all based on the science of something called post-traumatic growth, which is in the shortest term, shortest hand, that what doesn't kill us can make us stronger. And so we develop and deliver peer-based training programs that are designed to support folks who are struggling and in pretty acute places like Jay just described, and allow them not simply to cope or to deal with life as a diminished version of themselves, but actually to live a great life, to make sense of their experiences and to integrate them. And our flagship program is called Warrior Path, which is an 18-month program that starts with 7 days on the ground and then has ongoing follow-up. And Warrior Path's now delivered as part of a national network in Arizona, Virginia, through a mobile team with partners in Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, Maine, and then next year, Arkansas and Washington State, and then hopefully in the following year, California. So we've been working very hard on establishing best practices programs that work incredibly well, that address one of the core issues that face the warrior community, which is not wanting to ask for help, right? Not wanting to accept that there might be something that you're struggling with and that it might be beneficial to be able to get some kind of support. And we know that half of all people in warrior communities who might benefit from traditional mental health will not go. And as a general statement, they won't go because number one, they think they can figure it out on their own. And number two, they're worried they might be broken or damaged in some permanent sense. And so that's really been our focus, is how do we create a new front door on mental health? The challenge is it is simply not good enough. It is not acceptable to focus solely on acute programs, right? We have got to get into the business of prevention. And in that spirit, what drives us are sort of four unacceptable truths. The first is that if you look at the first responder community and the military community, we have lost for many, many years now more people to suicide than we have lost in the line of duty. I mean, we're talking in military terms, we're losing 8,000 people a year to suicide, and we've lost over 6,000 in the entirety of a 19-year conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan. It is wholly unacceptable that we would tolerate that as a nation. The second is that we far too often wait for people to ask for help before providing them that help. So we know that the average police officer is experiencing 2 traumatic incidents every 6 months. And yet we wait for people in a community who aren't inclined to ask for help or wait for them to experience a critical incident. And we set up people to get to a paradigm where they go from being okay to really, really, really not okay very quickly. That relates to the third thing that I find unacceptable, which is that we treat mental health as binary. We treat it as either you have it or you don't, when all of us know it's a continuum. Right? There are certain days where I feel great, other days where I'm not so great. And what we do is we tend to pathologize those times when we struggle and cause people to get stuck. The fourth is we've outsourced mental health to a small group of people who are difficult to access and harder to connect with. And a friend of ours, Vikram Patel, who's a psychiatrist, talks about this idea that mental health is too important to be left to mental health professionals alone. That does not mean that mental health professionals don't have a critical role to play in the mix, but it's essential that we normalize struggle and we democratize our capacity to deal with it. So those are the four things that are really driving us as we start to look at the world of first responders. And I've spent the last 18 months working with Bernie Gonzalez, who was a chief of police for training down in Miami-Dade. And what Bernie and I have been dedicated to trying to figure out from our perch and our perspective outside of the system is, how do we develop a comprehensive solution? I work for a bomb disposal guy, so we call it a left of boom solution, is how do we get into the business of prevention? And we spent 18 months sketching out what a program could look like that leverages every single component of all the things we do. Number one, intensive programs like Warrior Path. Number two, training and education to constantly talk to folks about well-being, stress management, personal wellness, dealing with grief, post-traumatic growth. Number three, supporting and transforming mental health, building peer support infrastructure where it does not exist, ensuring that peer support folks are healthy. That is critical that they are healthy as they pursue their mission, and training mental health professionals in the ideas of post-traumatic growth. And then the fourth is research and policy change. How do we measure the impact of what's happening? And the goal of this is twofold. One is to be very targeted and recognize that there are sort of four evolutions of someone's career. There's when they join, there's as they're serving, there's when they assume a leadership position, and there's when they get out. And we have to right size the right appropriate solutions along that to socialize topics of well-being so people don't feel that far away from asking for help, because it's a regular part of the discussion. The second is we have got to expand the continuum of mental health from a world where you're either fine or you figure it out on your own, or you go to a mental health professional. There have to be more options in a community of warriors. So part of the 18 months we've been working on, and Bernie's going to talk more about it in a second, has been trying to identify a geography where we can effectively implement and pilot this approach with the goal of creating a pilot that we can then expand across the country. And all roads ended up leading to Miami-Dade and Miami-Dade College, the School of Public Safety down there. And we are very close to hopefully sealing the deal with a group called the Greater Miami Police Association down there to help support the initial funding of this. And the goal is really to be able to integrate and embed all four aspects of our strategy into the world of law enforcement down there, to start to make a significant inroad. And I think when we look at this, what we know is that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And again, mental health has an important role to play. And these are issues that are leadership challenges. And I know Ed knows that more than anybody, is these are challenges that are leadership challenges. They're not mental health challenges. And we have got to be very wary of throwing more money into the world of mental health and not accounting for the fact of leadership. The other part of that is the only way to get different is to do different. We have got to try different models, different approaches, and we have got to try to break down a lot of these barriers that exist and not simply, I agree it's okay to not be okay, but you also have to do something when you're not okay to be okay. And I think we really need to understand and look at the culture in which we're working in and make sure we're doing things effectively. The last thing I'll say before I turn it to Bernie is there's undoubtedly an inextricable link between the well-being of first responders and police reform and the ability to not escalate situations. There is no question. And I recently had a first responder look at me in the wake of all that's happening. And he said, I don't get it. How does our nation expect us to heal our communities when no one provides us with the opportunity to heal ourselves? And I think that is truest words that I could possibly imagine. So we are dedicated to trying to figure this out. Obviously, we're not working on our own. We're trying to work in partnership, but our commitment is to dive in, to dig in, and to do the hard work to try to figure out how do we make a meaningful difference, because I can't personally abide a society where we ask people to do the world's most stressful and traumatic jobs and don't provide them meaningful support throughout that process. And with that, I'd love to turn it over to Bernie and have him share his thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Josh. And it's a great honor just to be here with all of you, which I consider this to be one of the greatest and most important topics facing law enforcement. When we talk about our current situation that is happening right now, police obviously already under incredible amount of stress is tasked to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, which creates such a tremendous amount of mental anguish and stress, not only to police personnel and obviously leadership, but also to families of law enforcement. And then on top of that, when we start looking at the great conflict that has existed in the community, that in itself now creates another great stressor on top of what you already had a tremendous load of mental anguish in our personnel. And then on top of that, we have to do better. You have to reform the police, right? You have to reform the police. And that's the current situation that we are in right now. Why do I say this links to police reform? Because for a long time, when you look at police reform from the days of Sir Robert Peel, August Vollmer, all the presidential commissions, you see an evolution of law enforcement clearly there from a power and authority mentality or philosophy to a more service-oriented philosophy. And that's what we're called to do. We're constantly called to reform ourselves to a more service philosophy and mentality. That being said, it is impossible to have a service philosophy or mentality if our personnel is not taken care of. If our personnel is not mentally healthy or equipped to do the job, then it becomes counterproductive. Case in point, if you have an in-service personnel, a police patrol personnel that has their child sick, has acute domestic problems with the wife because of the current situation, all of those stresses are coming in On top of that, you add the job stressors that are coming on, very difficult job calls that they're facing daily. And then nowhere to go with that. Nowhere to go with that in a proactive fashion, because everything that the system is set up, as Josh so accurately depicted, is all put in a reactive format. So now, where does this officer now talk and debrief and get all of these things that are happening in his life or her life outside to someone? They don't have it. So case in point, now all the stressors begin to amount on this police officer. And what generally happens is the class or the community come out as an outpour of some sort of outpour of emotion that is just an accumulation of stressors of years of not being able to channel it out somewhere. So for me, this is critical, because if we're going to police, if we're going to actually reform the police or enhance the police, we have to have that component attached to any reform strategies or any enhancement strategy. That's critically important. And as Josh mentioned, it cannot just be reactive strategies. It's got to be proactive strategies where you're attacking the actual problem much earlier, and you're allowing a diffusion of stress to go out of that officer before it amounts to a significant impact. That's critically important. Well, how do we do that, right? How do we actually take care of our personnel and also, create a system where the job stresses are handled correctly? You have to build proactive and reactive strategies. The reactive strategies are always going to be there. You're going to have individuals that are in need of critical care. So you're always going to have the reactive strategies in place, but the proactive strategies have to come in with constant awareness and training, consistency of training, consistency of education, and an awareness of post-traumatic growth, the growth of an individual through stress, and then the actual transverse form of training, which means that every single training component, whether it be in service, has to have a brief component of mental wellness on that training, so that it is a consistency of that happening all the time. So implementation is not enough. Implementation of all of this is not enough. We have to get to the point where you institutionalize and change the culture. That's where it becomes, would be like normalized to the point like you're breathing. And that's where we got to get to. So I'm very happy and honored to be here with you, and very eager to hear all the questions that are going to come in. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernie and Josh. Next, we're going to talk about developing organizational structure and understanding the needs of your agency. And we're going to turn to Chief Gramala, and she has some subject matter experts with her. So, Chief, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. And on behalf of the 9,900 men and women of the Los Angeles Police Department and our Chief of Police, Michael Moore, we stand in solidarity with all of you here today. We're the fixers. That's how we see ourselves as law enforcement officials. We are here to mend the problems of the community. We are here to hold the hands, give the hug, respond to gunfire. But now, today, the environment has never been tougher on us. And as we heard from the doctor previously, where do we turn? So the Los Angeles Police Department has dual cylinders that are working in this fashion. And one is through police training and education. And you'll be hearing from Dr. Luann Pinnell, but also from our esteemed colleagues in the behavioral science services realm. 15 trained psychologists led now by Dr. Denise Jablonski-Kay, with informative ways to connect with our people and also innovative ways to show compassion in these difficult times. So I'd like, with no further ado, to introduce Dr. Denise Jablonski-Kay to all of those watching today on Facebook Live. And again, we stand with you.
Thank you, Chief Grimala. Um, any services that are provided to LAPD personnel come with the support of our leadership, and that leadership definitely comes from Chief Grimala as well as Chief Moore. And so we are able to be innovative and do a lot of things because of strong leadership. Let me first start by saying that it was actually 52 years ago that BSS started as a unit with LAPD. And it started with one psychologist, Dr. Marty Reiser, who's known as the father of police psychology. But now we have 15, and we have grown and we have learned over those 52 years. One of the things that we have learned previously, early on, we were very reactionary. If there was a problem, we reacted to it. If there was a suicide, we would go to the divisions, and ultimately, because that was the only way we responded, people said, all right, who died, what terrible thing happened, because the psychologist is here now. We have changed that in that we don't just respond when something bad happens, we respond all the time. We send our psychologists out to the field. They're assigned to different divisions, and they go there and attend roll calls, attend meetings, provide training, are deeply embedded in the divisions, and they become the psychologist for the officers at that division. By doing that, we have kind of normalized this idea of talking to the psychologist. They know that it's comfortable talking to the psychologist. They know what it's like to talk to the psychologist. We've taken away some of the big mystery. One of the reasons people often give about not going and seeking mental health services is they say they don't know what to expect, and they kind of expect the worst, and so they don't go. So again, by putting our folks out into the field, we have been able to remove some of that mystery. But in terms of suicide prevention, we've basically approached this in a three-part fashion. We have an immediate primary kind of approach that if we hear that somebody is suffering and having some problems, and we are concerned about them, our psychologists will definitely do an assessment and determine how serious the problem is. We also have a very high threshold. We know that there's a lot of resistance to people coming in to seek services because their biggest fear is that their gun is going to be taken away from them. And one of the things a lot of our police officers are surprised to hear is how infrequently we actually remove a weapon, because we have this high threshold. Because if somebody is thinking some suicidal thoughts, that's very different than taking action. And we can work with somebody who comes to us and is thinking about those kinds of thoughts. So we have this primary kind of reaction, and the secondary thing that we do is education, and you're going to hear a little bit more about that with Dr. Pennell. But we have really tried to change how people think about suicide. Previously, people have thought that suicide is the action of somebody who is weak and cowardly and selfish. And we have really tried to, with radical compassion, we have really tried to help people understand that somebody who has suicidal thinking and suicidal thoughts is suffering a great deal. They are in pain. They have unending, unbearable pain, and they really don't want to kill themselves, but they really just want the pain to end. And so when we have been able to change how people think about a suicidal individual and help them see that this person is actually suffering a great deal, it's a lot easier to provide a more compassionate response to this individual. And I think changing that culture has been very, very important. One of the things we did to change that culture was to have a walk during Suicide Prevention Month called the Heart of the LAPD Walk. We started that in 2018, and we thought, well, we'd be very fortunate if 50 or 100 people showed up for this walk. But actually 750 people showed up. And what we found during that event, where we did a 5K walk around our academy, was that it was a moment in time where people could share their thoughts and feelings about having lost somebody, because most everybody in police work has lost somebody to suicide, somebody close, or they know somebody, they know somebody who has died by suicide. And it was a chance to share in their thoughts and feelings and even heal. It was also a chance to start the conversation, not just in September, but every single month after that. We had a conversation where now we were talking about suicide, and we were able to talk about the fact that there is help and there is hope, and where and how those services are achieved. The third approach that we have taken is in our very strong peer support program. I coordinate this program, and we have 350 peer support members who are very well trained in understanding um, suicidal thinking, depression, anxiety, what it means to suffer. A lot of our folks have been through experiences themselves, which makes them such great peer support members. We gave our peer support people 2 separate trainings of 8 additional hours solely focused on suicide and this idea of compassion and understanding the suicidal mind. In fact, we had a professional football player who had made a suicide attempt using a gun and survived the shooting come and talk. And when he talked about his thinking and how he felt so alone and isolated, it just really made our peer support people completely understand how important their role as peer support people actually is. And so we empowered our peer support people to not just wait for that call where somebody is reaching out to you, but reach out to people if you know that they're suffering. And we've certainly asked them to do this during this COVID times and during all the social unrest, because we know so many people are suffering, and our peer support people are working night and day to be able to provide the support services, and they are often the bridge to get people to come and talk to our mental health professionals. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Luann Pinnell, who will be talking about the training that she does on her end.
Thank you so much, Dr. Denise Jablonski-Kay. It's a privilege to be here. I get the opportunity to oversee the design and development of police training across LAPD, from the academy through command development courses. And we fully believe that how we train can significantly impact the growth and resiliency of our officers, not just for successfully completing a specific course, but successfully completing a career in law enforcement. And to discuss this today, I'm just going to cover briefly 3 key areas for our academy training, our police sciences and leadership training, and then an integrated response with our behavioral science services. Within academy training, we've created a framework where actually not just academy, but all the way through our department training, we look at training the whole officer. And we've been working at this for the last 12 years, looking at giving officers the right skill set, the right mindset, which I think we have emphasized quite a lot in law enforcement training, but also the right heart set. And we really look at, it's not just the how, the content of the training, or sorry, not just the what, the content of the training, but also the how. How do we facilitate increased learning and self-awareness? We have to look at the law enforcement tendency to tell people to sit down and shut up for 6 months. And then we actually expect them to come out of the academy and open up and be connecting with community members, but also connecting with each other. So how do we shift that environment within the academy? We want to make sure that we address that misperception that by teaching people to shove their emotions down, they are actually going to be better able to handle this profession, when we know that we will expose them to significant and repeated trauma over the course of this career. In reality, by getting them to see the expansiveness of human emotion and where to apply it and how to apply it and to let a little out at a time, that's part of the resiliency training that we weave into the academy. The other way that we do that is we train in a team, by a team, to be a team. And I know it sounds kind of cliche, but reinforcing that team concept that you are not in this alone. This profession is best handled when we lean on each other and reach out to each other. And so if we start that within the academy, that it is not weakness to not have every answer in the book, including the your experiential answers, it's actually a strength to reach out and lean on your partners. Many agencies right now are looking at the concept of active bystandership, and frequently that might be looked at in the realm of just intervening on excessive force or other things. But we want to actually build that bridge that the intervention is also looking out for each other as it comes to health and wellness as well. The second part I wanted to talk to you about is our Police Sciences and Leadership program. And back in 2016, we launched a course where we started bringing back every academy class at 11 months after they had finished the academy, and bringing them back as a class and building in kind of that review and awareness of what is the difference between academy training that it can be isolated and in a bubble, maybe not reality training as much, and then their experiences in the field training officer program. So by bringing them back together as a team and kind of learning again as a team how to lean on each other and share experiences and normalizing some of the responses that they are bound to have in that first year of experience. And within there, we are building in pieces on health and resiliency, wellness, particularly sleep hygiene at that point, because they are now working a 312, and how to manage the physical drain that eventually becomes an emotional drain as well. And so we build that into our Police Sciences and Leadership. 2 years later, we bring back that class again in Police Sciences and Leadership 2, and build on the skill set that we had. And our hope is to create a better foundation into this profession, a more resilient one, that when we start talking about these critical issues that we know officers are experiencing and normalizing some of the experiences that they might have, we believe that we can help officers create a healthier outcome in their career. Early on in this presentation, we listed all these other outcomes. And as I think Dr. Denise mentioned, suicide is the worst, but we often lose officers in a number of different ways. Marital conflict, domestic violence, alcoholism. So what are we doing to impact that sooner and certainly avoid the worst case scenario as well? And the last part I would just mention is the integrated in-services and psychology services together. That as every course develops from our supervisors through our command staff, that we are normalizing this conversation in every promotional class that we have out there. I know we have limited time, so hopefully there'll be time for questions later.
Thank you for tuning in to this Encore series of Preventing Death by Suicide, a chief-to-chief leadership wellness discussion. Be sure to check back on April 26th for part 2 of this series. We thank you for your support, and remember, our upcoming episode releases are every Wednesday, and published exclusively on Tuesdays is our monthly Icons episode. We hope you learned something from this episode of Encore and will join us next time for another edition of Encore, where we revisit past museum programs and conversations. For more information on this program, follow the link in the episode description. A special thanks to all of you for listening to this episode of Encore, a series from the Precinct 444 podcast network by the National Law Enforcement Museum. Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. We would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@nleomf.org. You can help us make our content even better. The National Law Enforcement Museum is located at 444 East Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and is dedicated to telling the story of American law enforcement. We expand and enrich the relationship between law enforcement and the community through educational journeys, immersive exhibitions, and insightful programs. Find us online at lawenforcementmuseum.org and stay tuned for more podcast content from Precinct 444. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you at the precinct.